coffee cup on the kitchen table had gone cold, the lipstick stain on its rim lingering from last night. My hands trembled, but no one was there to notice. The silence of the house was heavy, thick like the dust settling between the walls. Only the occasional cries of seagulls at the window broke its hollow stillness. As I bent to adjust my newborn daughter Lila's blanket, my mother's voice pierced the room like a dagger from the corner. "This trash, where are you going to put it, Carey?" I looked up, my eyes locking onto hers. My mother, Margot, sat in her armchair, her thin-framed glasses perched on the tip of her nose, a lace-trimmed handkerchief in her hand. Her face bore that familiar sharp expression, lips pursed, eyebrows arched in a mocking curve. She meant Lila, her own granddaughter. My tiny newborn girl clutching her blanket with fragile hands. The words caught in my throat. "Mom," I said, my voice shaky and weak, "she's my daughter." Margot pressed the handkerchief to her mouth and coughed lightly, as if my words were a cloud of dust hanging in the air, bothering her. "Yes, yes," she said, rolling her eyes, "your daughter. But how much space will she take up in this house, Carey? There's already enough mess." Mess. I'd heard that word for years. Since childhood, every sentence from Margot's mouth somehow pointed it at me. A messy life, a messy girl, a messy mother. I grew up under my father Victor's silent approval. He'd hide behind his newspaper, offering neither objection nor support to her words. My brother Felix, though, was always the golden child, given a car when he went to college, celebrated by the whole family at his graduation. My high school diploma, meanwhile, yellowed in a kitchen drawer among old bills. Lila's tiny breaths brushed against my chest. I lifted her into my arms, her scent filling me, milk and lavender, soft and innocent. "She's a baby," I said, my voice harder now. "Not trash." Margot's lips thinned into a line. "No need to get emotional," she said, standing up. "I'm just stating facts. Your life's already a chaos, Carey. This thing," she gestured at Lila, "will only make it harder." She walked to the door, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "I'll come back tomorrow," she added. "Hopefully you'll have pulled yourself together by then." When the door slammed shut, the house sank back into silence. Lila began to cry, her little face crumpling, but I was frozen. My mother's words echoed in my ears, trash. My daughter, a piece of me, was nothing but a burden in her eyes. I couldn't sleep that night. I put Lila in her crib, but my eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling. My mind wandered through the dusty corridors of the past. I remembered my 16th birthday, the cheap necklace I'd bought myself. Margot had said, "Where'd you find that, the dump?" Victor had just laughed. For Felix's 18th, they threw a party. I washed dishes in the kitchen, listening to their laughter. 25, when I got my first job, Margot didn't even congratulate me. "Well, at least you're doing something," she'd said, then moved on to Felix's plans for his new house. Being invisible felt like this. Your family not seeing you, not hearing you, brushing your existence aside like a shadow. I'd carried that weight for years, each neglect piling up like bricks. But that night, listening to Lila's cries, something inside me broke. Margot's voice, that mocking tone, belittling me again. This time was different. She'd hurt Lila just as she'd hurt me. And I couldn't let that happen. The morning light slipped through the curtains, dust motes dancing in the air. Lila's crib sat beside me. Her tiny chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, as if she'd found a peaceful world in her sleep. But there was no peace in me. Margot's words from yesterday had lodged in my mind like a knife, sinking deeper with every breath. Trash. How could she say that about Lila? How could she see her as an object? I started the coffee maker in the kitchen, but my hands still shook. A forgotten baby bottle from last night sat on the counter next to an empty milk carton, almost as if proving Margot's mess accusation right. But this time I didn't feel guilt. Her words didn't wound me anymore. They fueled my anger. I'd stayed silent for years, taken it all, lived in the shadows. But I couldn't stay silent for Lila. The doorbell rang just after 9. Margot stepped inside, a grocery bag in hand, her face wearing that same self-assured look. "You were so emotional yesterday," she said, setting the bag on the counter. "I hope you're more sensible today." I picked up Lila, wrapping her blanket tightly around her. Her tiny warmth balanced the cold rage inside me. "I'm sensible," I said, my voice like ice. "But I don't think you are." Margot raised an eyebrow, a surprised smirk curling her lips. "What are you saying, Carey?" "You don't need to come here anymore," I said, locking eyes with her. "Not you, not Victor, not Felix. It's over." Her eyes widened like saucers. "Are you kicking me out of your house?" Her voice trembled, a fragility I wasn't used to hearing. "No," I said, opening the door. "I'm kicking you out of my life." When I shut the door, Lila's breathing calmed against my chest. Margot's heels clacked down the stairs, and for the first time, the house's silence felt less like a burden and more like freedom. But this was just the start. I couldn't erase years of neglect, belittlement, and invisibility with one closed door. I had to do more. For Lila, for myself. That afternoon, my phone started ringing. First Victor, the quiet man who rarely emerged from behind his paper. "Carey," he said, his voice tired and distant as always, "your mother's upset. What do you think you're doing?" "Her being upset doesn't concern me," I said. "You ignored me for years. Now it's my turn." I hung up, but there was no peace inside me. Victor's voice dragged me back to my childhood. 10, I'd won a drawing contest at school. I'd run home to show Margot my prize, but she'd just said, "Nice," before talking about Felix's soccer game. Victor had sat in his chair, flipping his paper. That day I understood. I was a side character in their story. Then Felix called. "Carey, what's this nonsense?" he began, his voice as confident and commanding as ever. "Mom's crying, Dad's angry." "What are you trying to do?" "Nothing," I said. "Just doing what you all did. Forgetting you." "That's childish," he said, but there was a crack in his tone. "Families don't act like this." "Family?" I laughed, my voice a bitter echo. "You're not a family. You're a stage, and I'm done being the audience." When I hung up, my hand felt heavy. But it wasn't fear, it was resolve. Margot calling Lila trash had been the final straw. But this was only the beginning. I'd make them pay for everything they'd done. And this revenge would be quiet but devastating. That evening, after putting Lila to bed, I sat at the kitchen table. A pen in my hand, a blank sheet of paper before me. My mind was a storm, memories, anger, and plans swirling together. I pictured Margot's face, that stunned look, her trembling lips. For years she'd belittled me, and now she'd beg me. But it wasn't enough. Victor's silence, Felix's selfishness, they'd all pay. I pressed the pen to the paper and wrote the first line, "I will destroy them." But how? My weapon wasn't words or violence. It would be what they valued most, their perfect little worlds. Margot's social circle, Victor's comfortable routine, Felix's shiny career. I could take it all away. But first, I needed to see how deep I could cut. My phone buzzed. Text. From Felix. "Carey, I'm serious. Mom's a wreck. Apologize and end this nonsense." I read it but didn't reply. Apologize? I'd been the one apologizing for years. Every forgotten birthday, every dismissed achievement, every mess accusation, I'd swallowed it silently. Not anymore. I set the phone down and listened to the voice inside me. They don't even deserve your shadow. That night, I opened an old box. relics from my childhood, yellowed letters, a few photos, a notebook. In one photo, I was 12. Felix stood beside me, grinning for the camera. Margot and Victor in the background, a proud couple. I was at the edge, a faint smile on my face like I'd been added as an afterthought. I flipped through the notebook. Pages were filled with loneliness. No one noticed me today, I'd written once. Felix got a new award, but my poem stayed on the table. Those memories fueled my rage. Margot calling Lila trash wasn't just a moment, it was the culmination of years. And now I'd give that accumulation back to them. My plan took shape. I'd shatter Margot's social standing. Her perfect garden parties, her charity clubs, her fake smiles, they'd all crumble. The next morning, the doorbell rang. Margot was back. Her face was pale, her eyes red. "Carey," she said, her voice cracked. "What did you mean yesterday? Cutting us out of your life? That's so cruel." I picked up Lila, holding her close. "You're the cruel one," I said. "You called my daughter trash. You treated me like a burden for years. It's over." "I was just," she began, but I cut her off. "Just what? Telling the truth?" "No, Margot. You created your own truth and I lived it for years. But Lila won't." Her eyes welled up. "You need me," she said, her voice pleading. "We're family." "Family doesn't ignore me," I said. "Family doesn't toss a baby aside like trash." I shut the door, but this time there was no relief. My anger still burned. Margot's begging felt like a victory, but it wasn't enough. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number. An old friend, Nora. We hadn't spoken in years, but she was the perfect person to start a rumor in Margot's social circle. "Nora," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I need to tell you something. About Margot." "Sure," she said, intrigued. "What's going on?" "Everything," I said. "And I want everyone to hear it." When I hung up, a spark ignited inside me. My revenge had begun. Margot's tears were just a preview. The real game was starting now. After my call with Nora, the silence in the house rang with a different tone. As I fed Lila, my mind weighed the first steps of my plan. Nora was part of Margot's garden club, one of those soft-spoken, ever-smiling women. But she could turn a whisper into a hurricane. What I'd told her was simple but devastating. Margot calling her granddaughter trash, ignoring me for years, our family being a sham. Nora's voice had brimmed with shocked curiosity. "Everyone should know this," she'd said. And that's exactly what I wanted. That afternoon, I put Lila in her stroller and stepped outside. The air was cold, the wind slapping my face, but a warmth glowed inside me. Walking down the street, I felt the neighbors' eyes on me. This was a small town, gossip spread fast. Nora must have done her job. When I got home, my phone pinged with a text. "Margot. Carey, what's happening? People are looking at me strangely." I didn't reply. I set the phone down and picked up Lila. Her tiny hands touched my face, her eyes gazing at me. "I'll protect you," I whispered. "I won't let them ignore you." By evening, the doorbell rang again. Margot was back. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "Carey," she said, her voice pleading, "please stop. Everyone hates me. I don't know what you said, but stop." I held Lila close, looking at her. "You didn't stop," I said. "You didn't stop for years with me. You called Lila trash. Now it's my turn." "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. But her apology was an empty echo. I shut the door and the spark inside me turned into a flame. Margot's begging was sweet, but it wasn't enough. My revenge was just beginning. The next day, I took Lila into town. I heard the whispers at the coffee shop. Margot said that to her own granddaughter, one person said. She always sidelined Carey, another added. Nora's gossip had spread like wildfire. My phone rang. Felix. Carey, is this your doing? He shouted. Mom's friends stopped calling her. What did you do? Nothing, I said calmly. I just told the truth. Is this revenge? He asked, his voice angry but fragile. Do you want to ruin us? No, I said. You already ruined me. I'm just holding up a mirror. When I hung up, the eyes in the coffee shop were on me. But this time, I wasn't invisible. People saw me. For years, I'd faded in Margot's shadow. Now that shadow was turning on her. As I rocked Lila in her stroller, a strength grew inside me. This wasn't just gossip. This was years of vengeance. That night, Margot came to my door again. Her face was gaunt, her hands shaking. Carey, she said, please stop. Everyone hates me. The journalist called. I don't know what's happening, but stop. You didn't stop, I said coldly. You didn't stop with me for years. You called Lila trash. Now you're paying the price. I'm sorry, she begged, dropping to her knees. Please, Carey. Give me a chance. I shut the door. Her apology meant nothing. For years, they hadn't heard me. Now I wouldn't hear them. The next day, Jasper, an old acquaintance and journalist, would publish his piece. Margot's begging was just one piece of my revenge. There was more to come. Victor's silence, Felix's rage, they'd fall next. Margot's tears pooled outside my door as a strange peace settled inside me. For years, her words had cut me, her belittling pushed me into the shadows. But now, those tears were my triumph. I put Lila in her crib, gazing at her tiny face. Her innocence was the reason for this revenge. Margot's trash comment wasn't just a fleeting insult, it was the eruption of years of venom. And I'd give that venom back to them. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages. From Felix, Victor, even a woman from Margot's garden club. Carey, what's going on? One read. Margot didn't show up to the meeting, said another. Felix's was harsher. This has gone too far. Mom's broken. If you don't stop, I'll never forgive you. Forgive? I laughed. They'd never forgiven me for years. My birthdays, my successes, every corner of my life, they'd forgotten me. Now it was my turn. I set the phone down and thought of the next step. Margot's social world was crumbling, but it wasn't enough. I'd target Victor's comfortable life, Felix's shiny career. That day, I took Lila to the town library. There, I ran into Jasper, Felix's old high school friend, now a journalist. Seeing him, a light bulb went off in my head. Jasper, I said, smiling, it's been a while. Carey, he replied, surprised but friendly. Yeah, it has. How are you? Pointed to Lila. I'm good, I said. But my family, not so much. His brows lifted with curiosity. What's going on? I told him everything. Margot calling Lila trash, years of neglect, Victor's silence, Felix's selfishness. Jasper listened, scribbling notes. This is a story, he said finally. I could run it in the local paper. Keep it anonymous, I said. But make sure everyone knows who it's about. He grinned. Got it. When I got home, a satisfaction bloomed inside me. Jasper's article would take the gossip further. Margot's perfect image, Victor's calm life, Felix's fake success, they'd all collapse. My phone rang, Felix again. Carey, a journalist called Mom, he said, his voice shaking. What did you do? I told the truth, I said. Like you always did. This will destroy our family, he shouted. How could you? You destroyed me, I said. For years. Now I'm holding up the mirror. When I hung up, I heard Lila stir. I picked her up, her tiny hands brushing my chest. I'll protect you, I whispered. You won't grow up in their shadows. That night, Margot came to my door again. Her face was sunken, her hands trembling. Carey, she said, please stop. Everyone hates me. The journalist called. I don't know what you did, but stop. You didn't stop, I said coldly. You didn't stop with me for years. You called Lila trash. Now you're paying. I'm sorry, she begged, collapsing to her knees. Please, Carey. Give me a chance. I shut the door. Her apology was a hollow sound. For years they hadn't heard me, now I wouldn't hear them. Jasper's article would run tomorrow. Margot's begging was just a piece of my revenge. More was coming. Victor's silence, Felix's career, they'd fall too. I put Lila to bed and looked in the mirror. My face bore cracks, years of wear. But this time those cracks were strength. I was stepping out of the shadows, and no one could push me back. Jasper's article hit early the next morning. On the front page of the small-town paper, an anonymous but unmistakable story. Grandmother calls newborn trash, neglected daughter for years. The details were stark. Margot's coldness, Victor's indifference, Felix's selfishness. No names, but everyone knew. My phone wouldn't stop, texts, calls, notifications. But I silenced it all. I picked up Lila and looked out the window. The world was shifting. The doorbell rang just after 10. Felix stormed in, his face red, fists clenched. Carey, he shouted. This is your doing, isn't it? I saw the paper. I set Lila in her crib and turned to him. Yes, I said calmly. It's my doing. Why? He demanded, his voice shaking with rage. Why are you ruining us? Ruining, I said, laughing. You ruined me. You ignored me for years, my birthdays, my successes, everything. Now it's my turn. Felix went quiet for a moment, then slammed his fist on the table. Mom's sick, he said. This will be the end of her. Her end, I said, my voice hardening. She called Lila trash. She didn't care about my end for years. Why should I care now? You're a monster, he said, his voice breaking. Families don't do this. Families don't ignore me, I said. Families don't see a baby as trash. You weren't a family. I pointed to the door. Get out, I said. And don't come back. Felix left, slamming the door behind him. His anger left a satisfaction in me. For years I'd lived in his shadow, now he was drowning in mine. My phone rang, Victor. Carey, he said, his voice as tired as ever. Your mother's in the hospital. The paper, it was too much. I'm not sorry, I said. She deserved it. Carey, he pleaded, please. Forgive us. Forgive. I laughed. Did you forgive me? 16 with that necklace? 25 with my job? No. Now it's my turn. I hung up. Victor's begging was sweeter than Margot's tears. The silent man had finally spoken. But it was too late. That day I went into town. People's looks had changed. Some whispered, some turned away. At the coffee shop, a woman approached. Carey, she said. I read the paper. Is it true? Yes, I said, meeting her gaze. All of it. Unbelievable, she said, shaking her head. Margot was always so haughty. But this awful. I smiled. Yes, I said. Awful. When I got home, I picked up Lila. Her tiny face made it all worth it. Margot in the hospital, Felix's fury, Victor's pleas, it was years of vengeance. But this wasn't the end. My plan pressed on. I needed to strike Felix's career next. Shatter his bright life, his fake success. That night, I called an old coworker, Liam, who worked at Felix's company. "Liam," I said, "I need to ask you something. About Felix." "Sure," he said, curious. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," I said. "And I'm going to use it." When I hung up, the fire inside me grew. Margot had fallen, Victor was begging. Now it was Felix's turn. And he'd pay the biggest price. My call with Liam was short but potent. Felix's position at his company was a cornerstone of his golden boy image. He'd bragged about it for years, but Liam revealed it was built on a lie. Felix stole credit for others' work, lied in meetings. "Everyone knows," Liam said, "but no one speaks up. He's the boss's favorite." "Not anymore," I said. "Send me proof." The next morning, an email from Liam arrived. Documents, emails, notes stolen from the real project owners. Felix's lies sprawled in black and white ink before me. I had a weapon now. Margot's social world was gone, Victor's silence broken. Now it was time to topple Felix's crown. I grabbed my phone and texted Liam, "Send this to the company, but keep my name out of it." "You sure?" he replied. "I'm sure," I wrote. He earned it. That day, I took Lila to the park. The air was crisp, leaves rustling under my feet. As I pushed the stroller, I imagined Felix's face. He always won, always shone. But this time, he'd lose. When I got home, my phone rang. "Felix." "Carey," he yelled, his voice drenched in panic. "I got fired. Someone leaked documents." "Was it you?" "I don't know," I said calmly. Maybe the truth came out. "This is your doing," he screamed. "You've ruined us. Mom's in the hospital, Dad's a mess, and now I'm jobless." "I'm not sorry," I said. "You ruined me for years. You forgot my birthdays, my successes, everything. Now it's your turn." "You're a monster," he said, his voice cracking. "Families don't do this. Families don't see me as a shadow," I said. "Families don't call a baby trash. You weren't a family." When I hung up, a peace settled in me. Felix's rage was sweeter than Margot's begging. His bright world had crumbled in my hands. But this wasn't the end. Victor was still standing. The silent man, always in the shadows. Now those shadows would turn on him. That evening, the doorbell rang. Victor stood there, his face sunken, hands trembling. "Carey," he said, "Felix lost his job. Your mother's in the hospital. What have you done?" "I let the truth out," I said. "You ignored me for years. Now it's your turn." "Carey," he pleaded, "please stop. You've destroyed the family." "Family?" I laughed. "You weren't a family. What was I to you? A mistake? A shadow?" Victor went quiet, his head dropping. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything." "Too late," I said. "You didn't apologize for years. I don't need yours now." I shut the door, hearing Lila wake. I picked her up, gazing at her tiny face. "I'll protect you," I said. "You won't grow up in their shadows." That night, I looked in the mirror. My face showed exhaustion, but my eyes burned with fire. Margot had fallen, Felix had crumbled. Victor's begging was the final blow. But something inside me said this wasn't enough. I had to destroy their world completely. Years of neglect, belittlement, invisibility, they'd all pay. I grabbed my phone and dialed Nora. "Nora," I said, "there's one more thing. About Victor." "Tell me," she said, intrigued. "Everything," I said. and everyone needs to hear it. When I hung up, the fire inside me turned into a blaze. Victor's turn was next, and he'd pay the heaviest price. After my call with Nora, the final piece of my plan clicked into place. Victor's silence had propped up Margot's words and fed Felix's selfishness for years. He was the family's invisible pillar, doing nothing but allowing everything. Now that silence would turn against him. I told Nora the basics, but it was enough to ruin him. Victor's passivity, how he'd left me alone since childhood, how he'd watched Margot's insults unfold. Everyone should know, I said. His fake calm needs to crumble. The next morning, the town's gossip mill churned again. Nora had spread Victor's silent guilt to the garden club, the coffee shop, everywhere. People whispered, "He never stopped Margot," they said. "He forgot Carey for years." My phone rang. Victor. "Carey," he said, his voice trembling. "People are staring at me." "What did you do?" "I told the truth," I said. "You stayed silent for years. Now it's my turn." "Carey, please," he begged. "Your mother's in the hospital. Felix is jobless. Is this my end too?" "Yes," I said. "Your end. Because you did nothing." I hung up. Victor's world, his quiet routine, had to fall. That day, I went into town. People's looks had shifted. Some turned away, some whispered. At the coffee shop, a man approached. "Carey," he said, "is what I heard about Victor true?" "Yes," I said, meeting his eyes. "All of it." "Unbelievable," he said, shaking his head. He always seemed so calm. "A fake calm," I said. "He left me in the shadows for years." When I got home, the doorbell rang. Victor stood there, his face pale, hands shaking. "Carey," he said, "please stop. Everyone hates me." "What did you do?" "What you did," I said. "Nothing. But this time your silence has a price." "I'm sorry," he pleaded, dropping to his knees. "Please, Carey. Give me a chance." "A chance?" I laughed. "Did you give me a chance? 16 with that necklace? 25 with my job? No. Now it's my turn." I shut the door, hearing Victor's sobs. But there was no pity in me. For years he hadn't heard me, now I wouldn't hear him. That night, I put Lila to bed and looked in the mirror. My face showed weariness, but my eyes gleamed with triumph. Margot was in the hospital, Felix was jobless, Victor had crumbled. My family, that sham theater, was gone. But something inside me said this wasn't enough. I had to obliterate their world entirely. I grabbed my phone and called Jasper. "Jasper," I said, "can you write another article?" "Sure," he said. "About what?" "All of them," I said. "Margot, Victor, Felix. The family's collapse." "Got it," he said. "This'll be big." When I hung up, the fire inside me hadn't died. But this time there was peace. My revenge was nearly complete. Years of neglect, belittlement, invisibility, they'd all paid a price. But one final blow remained. And it would end everything. As I watched Lila sleep, I whispered, "I'll protect you. You won't grow up in their shadows." I looked in the mirror. The shadows were gone. Now it was just me. And no one could push me back. Jasper's second article hit the town like a storm. Titled "The Family's Fall," it laid bare Margot's haughty coldness, Victor's guilty silence, Felix's fake success. No names, but the town knew. My phone buzzed endlessly, texts, calls, notifications. But I silenced them all. I picked up Lila and looked out the window. The world was mine now. That day I went into town. People's looks were different, some whispered, some nodded. At the coffee shop, a woman approached. "Carey," she said, "I read the article." "Incredible." Thanks, I said, smiling. The truth came out. Margot was always so arrogant, she said. But you're a warrior. I smiled. Maybe I am. When I got home, the doorbell rang. Felix stood there, his face sunken, eyes red. Carey, he said, his voice trembling, it's over. My job, Mom, Dad, all because of you. No, I said calmly. Because of you. You forgot me for years. You called Lila trash. Now you're paying. I'm sorry, he begged, dropping to his knees. Please, Carey. Forgive us. Forgive. I laughed. Did you forgive me? 16 with that necklace? 25 with my job? No. Now it's my turn. I shut the door, hearing Felix's sobs. But there was no pity. He'd been the golden boy. Now he was nothing. That evening, Victor called. Carey, he said, his voice weak, your mother's home. But no one talks to us. What did you do? I told the truth, I said. You stayed silent for years. Now it's my turn. Carey, please, he pleaded, you've destroyed us. No, I said. You destroyed me. I'm just holding up the mirror. I hung up, putting Lila to bed. Her tiny face glowed. I'll protect you, I said. You won't grow up in their shadows. That night, Margot came to my door. Her face was pale, hands trembling. Carey, she said, it's all gone. My friends, my status, everything. What did you do? What you did, I said. You belittled me for years. You called Lila trash. Now you're paying. I'm sorry, she begged, tears streaming down her face. Please, Carey. Give me a chance. A chance? I said, shutting the door. Did you give me one? No. Now I don't have one for you. When the door closed, a peace settled in me. Margot had fallen, Victor had crumbled, Felix was broken. My family, that sham theater, was done. But one last step remained. I had to erase their world completely. I grabbed my phone and called Nora. Nora, I said, one more thing. A final rumor. Tell me, she said, intrigued. Everything, I said. And everyone needs to hear it. When I hung up, the fire inside me died down. But this time there was victory. My revenge was nearly complete. Years of neglect, belittlement, invisibility, they'd all paid. But one final blow remained. And it would finish it all. I picked up Lila and whispered, I'll protect you. No more shadows. I looked in the mirror. My face showed weariness, but my eyes shone with light. I'd stepped out of the shadows, and no one could push me back. Nora's final rumor shook the town one last time. The word spread that Margot was home from the hospital, but even neighbors wouldn't knock on her door. Victor's silence became a monument of guilt in the town's chatter. Felix, jobless and friendless, faded into a lonely shadow. My family, that fake theater, was gone, and I was finally free. That morning, I held Lila and looked out the window. The sun rose on the horizon, golden light flooding the house. I'd lived in shadows for years, but now the light was mine. My phone was silent, no calls from Margot, Victor, or Felix. Quiet was a triumph. That day, I went into town. People looked at me differently, some nodded, some smiled. At the coffee shop, a woman approached. Carey, she said, we heard everything. You've shown incredible strength. Thanks, I said, rocking Lila in her stroller. I'm not in the shadows anymore. Margot was always so lofty, she said. But you're a fighter. I smiled. Maybe I am. When I got home, no one rang the bell. No Margot begging, no Victor's silence, no Felix's rage. For the first time, my house felt truly mine. I put Lila in her crib and looked in the mirror. My face showed exhaustion, but my eyes glowed with peace. Years of neglect, belittlement, invisibility, they'd all paid a price. That evening, I opened an old box. Childhood relics, yellowed letters, a few photos, a notebook. I tore up the photos, tossed the letters in the trash. I held the notebook and read it one last time. No one noticed me today, I'd written. But now everyone had. I closed it and tucked it in a drawer. I wasn't that Carey anymore. My phone buzzed, a text from Nora. "Carey, the town's still talking. You're a legend." I smiled and didn't reply. I didn't want to be a legend. I just wanted to be seen. For Lila, for myself. Margot's trash had set me on this path. But now that word was just an echo. That night I held Lila and whispered, "I'll protect you. You won't grow up in their shadows." Her tiny hands touched my face, her eyes gazing at me. The love I'd sought from my family for years I'd found in her. And it was worth everything. The next morning I looked out at the town. Margot's house stood in the distance, curtains drawn, lights off. Victor's car sat in the garage, no movement. Felix was nowhere to be seen. Their world was done. But mine was just beginning. I put Lila in her stroller and walked to the park. The air was cool, but a warmth glowed inside me. People waved, kids smiled at Lila. I was visible. And that was my revenge's final victory. When I got home, I looked in the mirror. My face bore cracks, years of scars. But this time, those cracks were strength. Margot had fallen, Victor had crumbled, Felix was broken. My family, that sham theater, was finished. And I was finally me. As I watched Lila sleep, I whispered, "No more shadows. Just us." The sun set, and the house's silence filled with peace. My revenge was complete. The years of pain, belittlement, invisibility, they'd all paid. And I, in a new dawn, was free.